The Heart of Courage, The Tragic Fate of John R. Gray and the Massacre at Rabaul. On the morning of February 20th, 1942, deep in the heart of the Pacific conflict, Australian prisoner of war John R. Gray stood defiant before his captors. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of jungle rot mixing with the acrid tang of sweat and fear. But Gray himself showed no fear. He had endured days of interrogation, suffering unimaginable brutality at the hands of the Japanese troops occupying Rabaul, New Britain. They wanted only one thing: the whereabouts of his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel J.J. Scanlon. Yet, despite the pain, despite the endless threats, Gray held his silence. The Japanese were not known for their mercy. A lesson had to be made. And so, on that fateful day, the Australian soldier was dragged to an open clearing. Forced to his knees, his arms bound behind his back, he faced his executioners with unyielding resolve. In an act of unspeakable cruelty, the Japanese soldiers chose not the quick relief of a bullet or the sharp end of a bayonet. Instead, they slit open his chest and, while he still breathed, reached inside and removed his heart. His last sight was the bloodied hands of his tormentors. His final thought perhaps a prayer for his fallen comrades. His body crumpled to the earth, lifeless but never broken in spirit. The fall of Rabaul and the massacre at Toll and Waitavalo. The execution of John R. Gray was but one of the countless horrors that unfolded after the fall of Rabaul. Just weeks earlier, on January 23, 1942, Japanese forces had launched a devastating attack on the strategic Australian-held territory. Overwhelmed and outgunned, the Australian defenders, including the legendary Lark Force, fought valiantly but were ultimately overrun. The battle was over almost before it had begun, leaving more than 1,000 Australian soldiers captured by the advancing Japanese. For the prisoners of war, captivity did not mean survival. For the Japanese Imperial Army, surrender was the ultimate disgrace, and prisoners were often treated with brutal contempt. The Australian soldiers who fell into enemy hands were doomed from the start. On the morning of February 4, 1942, the nightmare deepened. At Toll and Waitavalo, roughly 160 Australian soldiers were led in small groups deep into the jungle under the pretense of relocation. What awaited them was not a new camp, nor the prospect of long-term imprisonment, but cold-blooded slaughter. At Toll Plantation, men were forced onto their knees and bayonet one by one. At Waitavalo, gunfire echoed through the trees as yet another group was ruthlessly executed. Only 6 men miraculously survived, crawling through the thick underbrush, feigning death, and escaping under the cover of darkness. Their testimonies would later reveal the chilling details of the massacre and bring to light the brutality inflicted upon their comrades. Justice denied. The horrors of Rabaul would not be forgotten, and in the aftermath of the war, the world sought justice. The Allies placed the blame for the massacre at Toll and Waitavalo squarely on Masao Kuzunos, the commanding officer of the Japanese 144th Infantry Regiment. He was set to stand trial for war crimes, a reckoning for the atrocities committed under his command. But justice was not to be. Rather than face the consequences of his actions, Kuzunos chose a different fate, starving himself to death in late 1946 before he could be brought before a military tribunal. For the families of those who perished, there was no closure, only the bitter truth that their loved ones had suffered unspeakable fates in the jungles of New Britain. A legacy of valor. John R. Gray's name is etched into history as a symbol of defiance, a soldier who chose duty and honor over self-preservation. The men who perished at Toll and Waitavalo are remembered not as mere casualties, but as heroes who faced the worst of humanity with unbreakable spirit. Their sacrifice serves as a reminder of the cruelty of war, but also of the courage that defines those who stand against tyranny. To this day, the massacre at Rabaul remains one of the darkest chapters in Australia's wartime history, a tale of loss, horror, and the enduring power of human resilience.